I now recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. I want to thank the members that are joining us today and their interest in the bills we are considering. I also want to thank the witnesses that traveled to Washington to be with us. We look forward to hearing from you. The foundation of American wildlife conservation is a, quote, user pays, end quote, model where hunters and anglers fund conservation work through taxes and fees paid when they purchase hunting and fishing equipment. This model raises over $1 billion each year for wildlife conservation. Congressman Blake Moore's Tax Stamp Revenue Transfer Wildlife and Recreation Act would build upon this North American model by investing revenues from the current stamp tax paid on firearm suppressors into the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Conservation Trust Fund. This bill would fix a long-standing anomaly that treats this tax stamp revenue differently than revenue collected from other taxes on firearm equipment. Currently, revenues from firearm suppressors goes into the general treasury without a stated purpose. Directing these revenues toward wildlife conservation would provide nearly $200 million in additional federal funding to save some of our nation's most imperiled species. Congressman Zinke's Wildlife Movement Through Partnerships Act builds upon his work as Secretary of the Interior by creating voluntary and incentive-based programs to conserve movement areas for big game and other wildlife species. The bill we are considering today would build upon the success of these programs have had in conserving those species and expand it to others. It is important to emphasize that this bill draws no lines on maps and doesn't expand the federal estate. Instead, it prioritizes incentive-based and voluntary efforts that have proven effective in conserving vital habitat for wildlife. Congressman Grothman's BioSafe Act addresses the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's BIDA rule, regulations that are said to ensure the biological integrity, diversity, and environmental health of our nation's refuge system. This subcommittee held an oversight hearing on this proposed rule back in April and heard from witnesses representing state game and fish agencies, the agricultural community, and conservation organizations. The witnesses shared valuable perspectives on why this rule is bad for those who work in and enjoy National Wildlife Refuge System, but especially bad for the wildlife relying on the systems and our refuges for vital habitat. Congressman Grothman's bill would require the service to withdraw this harmful proposed rule. We also will be considering a discussion draft from Congressman Graves that addresses coastal restoration in the lower Mississippi River watershed. The discussion draft would create a 10-year grant program at NOAA Fisheries to provide technical assistance and financial support for coastal restoration activities in the region. The funding would help protect barrier islands, build levees, restore fish habitat, and other nature-based solutions. Last month, I joined Chairman Westerman and Congressman Graves for a field tour in South Louisiana, where we saw the damage that had been done to the Delta by separating the Mississippi from the Delta, the Mississippi River from the Delta, and compounded by Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. The importance of coastal restoration, the challenges these communities face would be addressed by this bill. Lastly, Congressman Adrian Smith Swanson and Hugh Butler Reservoir's Land Conveyance Act would convey federal lands to Frontier County in Hitchcock County, Nebraska. The conveyance of these lands would resolve local concerns regarding management of recreational lands surrounding 2 Bureau of Reclamation reservoirs. I want to once again thank the members and the witnesses for their time and interest today. I look forward to a robust discussion. Thank you. Chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Nichols, I recognize your community. It's just like mine. I remember attending a town hall meeting one time, and there was a couple of folks running for county commissioner, I think. And someone during the question and answer period asked one of the ladies who was running, if you're elected, who's going to be our cook at the local restaurant? I mean, the concern was, in a small community, you have to have these things, and there's very few people to replace them. But I digress. I need to ask some questions as opposed to just comment. So let me ask this question of you, Mr. Cochran. The amount of money that is necessary is a lot. I think I saw $50 billion, maybe $100 billion to take care of the situation, and it's ongoing because, of course, that's the way a river works. If we go ahead and make this investment, aren't we really setting the stage for having to make the next one? Because we have to, if we don't we run the risk of losing the investment we've just made?
Well, there are two risks there, right? I'm trying to parse between the two.
Keep it very short because I have to get to Mr. Girton. I've got some really tough questions for him. He deserves them. Go ahead. Go ahead. Short.
If we don't, yes, we risk losing what we've invested. If we do, we have the opportunity to maintain not just that part of the world, but all of the benefits that are associated with it. Because if we don't just lose the investment. We lose all of the benefits that exist today as they go away.
Right, and it would be helpful. Everyone that's supportive of this, and I am. I was one of the people risking my life in the helicopter a couple of weeks ago as we flew over miles and miles and miles of what used to be land and now is not. So I get it. So if I could have those existing investments that are at risk, I would like to see the list. And I certainly listened to Congressman Graves, but the written summary would be welcome. Mr. Girton, I have a very large, the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge is in my district back in Oregon. And for many, many years, cattle grazed upon it in a cooperative way, and there was zero doubt that the presence of cattle, when appropriately managed, helped with the birds that used that refuge. Correct or not? In other words, I have in front of me, of course, any number of studies that indicate that appropriately managed grazing helps with birds. So just tell me, do I have this right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we'd agree with that. Appropriately managed grazing does benefit many types of habitat and benefits wildlife. That's why we have 1.9 million acres of grazing with partners on the refuge system. It helps us meet our mission, but we do the homework to make sure it'll be compatible with
You do the homework, and that is why the rule is so problematic. You've always done the homework, and yet this rule imposes a higher burden upon you than you already existed since 2001. So why the bias? Why the bias suddenly against cooperative ag and natural predator management? I don't get it. Why has this higher barrier been raised when we all know these types of things were working?
So, Mr. Chairman, we earnestly and sincerely don't believe we're raising the bar or requiring
if I may, let me just read this to you. It says the rule, if finalized, would make sweeping changes to the ability of refuge managers to utilize key management tools. Certain practices such as native predator control and cooperative ag are prohibited unless refuge managers fully evaluate the potential environmental impacts of the management activity. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday, September 13th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.